I'm an out-of-work DJ. 70s disco DJ, and got fired from every radio station, but ended up earning a couple degrees and realized I love playing with technology. Earned my master's at the University of Florida doing documentary production, then came to Texas, taught at Sam Houston State for a couple years teaching broadcasting, started a doctorate here at University of Texas, ended up finishing at USC, the University of the immature USC on the West Coast. Came back, was head of the communication technology sequence here at UT for 9 years, then founded the Center for Mass Communication Research at the University of South Carolina. Left USC for a couple years to be involved in the .com boom as director of research for a company called 2Wire that did networking equipment. And since the .com bubble, been back at the University of South Carolina, where I'm nominally a professor of journalism, but all my work is related to media technologies, media industries, trying to help people figure out how to make money off these things. And I'm also, if you look on the internet carefully, you'll see I'm also Chief Research Officer for One World Online, which is a San Jose-based startup that does online research.
How about the book?
Oh yeah, since 1992, we have together, Technology Futures and I have been doing the Communication Technology Update, which was just created to fill a hole in the market. Nobody was keeping track of all the technologies and saying, here's what's going on right now. And if you're going to teach it, we needed a textbook. So in '92, I convinced Larry to publish as one of his little booklets from TFI, this thin document that sold 500 copies. The next version sold 2,500. And then Focal Press picked it up. It's now published by Taylor and Francis. We do it every 2 years, but the book is available. It's called Communication Technology Update and Fundamentals. It's available anywhere books are sold, about $59.99 now.
Wow. Texas are expensive, huh?
Yeah. No, there are other publishers that wanted to charge a lot more. We stuck with a publisher that would keep the price fairly low, as it's 326 pages that covers the latest in television, radio, movies, computers, internet, mobile media, ebooks, video games, telephony, social media, and a few other things.
Thank you. I thought what we did is spend about 10 minutes on maybe AR and 10 minutes on VR. And originally we were going to then open it up for audience discussion, but I think maybe just a change in plans since we're a little bit, I went over on mine, sorry, that we just let the audience also interject and ask questions as we go.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So let's start with AR. What do you think?
Number one thing is business applications. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've proven with Pokemon Go that you can do it, but the business driver in Pokemon Go were the businesses who paid money to have the Pokemon put in their businesses so people would come into the businesses to catch them. So you have two dimensions. On one level, on the gaming level, you have the opportunity literally to create traffic and awareness, but on the second level, you have the ability to distribute information. And advertisers are always looking for a new way to break through this cacophony of media messages, and AR is going to be a way to do that.
How about are we all going to be wearing little Google Glass-like things?
No. I think our primary, it's inconvenient. The Google Glass taught us an important lesson. The biggest reason the Google Glass was rejected was not because of what you could receive, but because the camera built in and people were concerned about setting up places where you couldn't have them. Locker rooms, restrooms, any area of privacy. That led to a certain stigma being attached to the devices. But frankly, if I want to see a translation, it's just as easy to hold this up and look at signs. I mean, I'm wearing glasses all the time, but I was never tempted to get Google Glass. I don't like to generalize for myself, but I think that there is a limit to wearing something that we can get through, and this device is ubiquitous.
I find that device very cumbersome, and pulling out my cell phone and looking at something for directions, I find incredibly cumbersome. So I agree with that. Personal experience shouldn't be the guide, but to me, it's just the opposite. That would make it so much easier to go to a museum and not have to deal with an external device. And to me, it's just a constraint that needs to be overcome. It's our reluctance to adopt something new. I mean, when people first started talking to their earpieces on their cell phones, so somebody just randomly in a grocery store would just start talking, that disturbed me. It was spooky at first, but now I don't think anything of it. I think it may be the same with the glasses. So I guess time will tell.
Well, but the other thing is, what can we replace glasses with? Instead of having glasses, we can also have something that just actually puts the light on our corona, and that'll use a lot less power. Just beam it straight into the eye. That's just practical.
That sounds scary to me.
You're the one who just showed the murder.
What?
The VR. I didn't show them in the porn.
Your question, I mean, getting along with that point, really kind of the dialogue that you guys are having, the rate of change of things is rapid, continue to be rapid, and moving faster than really adoption will allow it to happen, I think, is in my view. So how are we going to, technology is moving faster than people are willing to accept it. You know, not everybody has Alexa at home, for example, but it's great technology. How does that impact the forecast in terms of, I know we talked about Fisher Pry and Gompertz, but does it get further apart as the rate of change is continuing to go as fast as it is?
So far, we haven't repealed Gompertz and Fisher Pry. These are S-shaped curves that just basically say a new technology is generally slow to be adopted at first, and then it picks up steam, and then you have a mass adoption phase. And the question always is, at this point, a lot of these technologies will even get on the curve at all. And I think we're kind of early on the curve with AR, and haven't gotten on the curve with VR yet, but about to. But the steepness of these curves is just hard to say at this point. There is, I think, a saturation point, but on the other hand, kids seem to be able to absorb a lot of this stuff a lot faster than I am, for example.
There's a great technology you want to look at for analyzing that, and that's fax technology. Remember, the basic technology for fax was developed in the 50s, the 1850s, where you had the first ability to transmit pictures over wires. It took about 130 years for fax machines to reach a critical mass point because of the need to develop standards, transmission systems. But in 1985, you hit a critical mass, and in 18 months, you went from about 10-15% penetration to more than 85% penetration. For a business technology, that's one of the most rapid ever. The other big innovation I would point to is in 2007, when the dominant phone brands were BlackBerry and Nokia, Apple introduced the iPhone that had a totally different ID. With that different design, and with the copying of that design by Samsung and others, Nokia, BlackBerry went away. The phone didn't go away, but in virtually 24 months, the market had shifted completely. And what that says is the market has an incredible ability to respond when there is an economic incentive. And
that's the inflection point when the economic incentive is there.
The economic incentive does a great job. There can be other incentives too. Social media, Facebook, when it hit its inflection point, that was not an incentive. Facebook was not making money at that point, but the critical mass came from the users wanting it. But I guess what I'm saying is that the market does respond, and market economics still jump out and say, as long as there is capability in manufacturing and distribution, then we're going to have the reaction.
Before we leave AR to VR, I just wanted to kind of make one point that's relevant to communications people, and that is if we really do start wearing glasses that are capturing video all the time and sending it back to somewhere, we could have a pretty big load on the network of video going both directions as opposed to just going to the set. So that's a communications thing.
There's one more quick driver to bring into, and that is in AR we are not limited to having one overlay. And there are going to be some interesting lawsuits that are going to be filed in terms of ownership and copyright. When I have the ability to come into this room and I'm with Hilton, and I can repaint all of the Marriott signs you see to give Hilton messages. Am I violating any of the ownership rights of Marriott just because I can overlay a different reality on where you are? We have the ability to overlay any reality on any place, and legal scholars haven't begun to address the issue of ownership of the cyberspace that surrounds space.
I have a question. So would this accelerate the adoption of 5G? I mean, when you're talking about...
He asked if this would accelerate adoption of 5G. I think the answer is yes, especially if we go with some type of handset, a face-mounted device that's taking video all the time, certainly. But it also, if you look at the examples of people using it, of all different types of uses, a lot of information is going back and forth, and we're making it more convenient than on a handset. It'll just generate a lot more data, which will make 5G more important. So yes, very much indeed. That's why one of the big areas of uncertainty to me that matters a lot is whether the glass will ultimately be successful. And that would be one of the things I would really want to address. Whether Augie's right or whether I'm right would make a big difference in all this to me. So that's probably what I want to drill at, try to find some analogies that would argue one way or the other. With this something that's going to, something that will be a constraint that will be overcome, or will it not?
How important is it to have a new generation of authoring tools for the content for this stuff? Because it seems to me that is actually probably a bigger constraint to making these things really take off than actually having, the view technology itself, or even the networks possibly to support it.
It's not just important, it's critical. Yeah. But you have to layer, you can't have your authoring techniques until you have your grammar. One of the things we have that we don't realize because we consume so much video, there's a grammar to cinema. We know what a fade to black means. We know what a swish pan means. There are certain things that convey a change in time or a change in place. Those grammars have not been developed for virtual reality. Not only that, but you lose something. In traditional storytelling, whether you're looking at a poem or a novel or a film, the goal of the author is to focus your attention someplace so that you can see the story. In virtual reality, you're going exactly the opposite thing. Your goal is you're free to focus anywhere you want. Now we're back into tell your own story. And those little books are fun, and they still publish a few hundred of them a year, but it's nothing compared to the standard. So I'm one of those people that I'm a little more skeptical of the success of virtual reality simply from the idea that when you're creating a story, the goal is to get someone's attention, to grab it and focus it where you want it. It's like magic. Don't look behind the curtain. There are places where the VR is going to work. There are other things where the VR, let's take a classic example from the 1960s. Disney invented a movie format called Circle Vision 360 that had the 9 cameras pointed different directions, and you walked into a theater, you stood up, and there were the 9 screens. And they had one of the first displays in Disney World started out with an airplane flying and ended up being a fire truck racing down the road, and ultimately you were on Nob Hill in San Francisco. And as it started twisting and turning, the room's not moving, just the pictures are moving, and everybody's hanging on. Whoa! Innovative, unique, a wonderful experience. And they built 3 of them. Yeah, they built a second one in Epcot just for China. That's one of the greatest pictures if you want to see some of the beauty of China without seeing the complexity of the society. That circle vision is a wonderful thing, but that was not widely adopted. It could have been. The camera rigs are available. As you saw, it was a similar camera rig used in the illustration he had for shooting the porn. But there's a need in storytelling and a need as a consumer to be taken somewhere, to have you grabbed. So I don't know if we can do that in VR, but
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Well, I mean, it's still the Wild West and exploration phase, so we don't know. I thought a lot about it. I mean, how do you pull a story through, and at the same time allow a little experiential,
Right.
which is why I like the example from Stranger Things, because there's a strong storyline in Stranger Things
Right.
that pulls you through, but down on the other side, upside down, is an opportunity to maybe explore a little bit more and experience it.
Well,
But-
let me give a different answer very briefly. Throw out the whole idea of storytelling. If you want true interactivity in VR, you go to video games. And what we have emerging is a new generation of video games that have at their heart a story, but you become a character in the story, fighting a battle, and the computer is sophisticated enough to take you to an ending or take you from one level to another. That is not traditional cinema, and that's a new grammar, and we've seen the best success in VR so far in video games.
Yeah, and it's funny, I had that same conversation over the lunch table with Hudson and Harrison and my daughter, all about the same age in their 20s, and I was trying to describe what, and they said, we already do that in video games. So there is that. But my question for everybody is, I don't see it being a replacement for movies or TV series or whatever. I see it maybe perhaps being a new art form that grows up aside all these others. And it'll have its own way of being successful that's not necessarily competitive with the things we have already, but it'll be another competitor for our time, and for people that provide communication services, a very high bandwidth consumer of their resources. It wouldn't take a lot of people doing deeply immersive either VR games or VR cinema to really hit the network, because when you have 360 at the resolution you need, plus sometimes not even just 3 dimensions, you also have dimensions of moving this way and back and forward, as well as just looking around. That's a lot of data. And if only a few people, if it's only 10% of the people are doing it at one time, it'll be a lot more than people watching HDTV films, I think.
Well, the big question is, how are we going to create the architecture for these systems? Because in one architecture, the game is taking place in a central computer, and you have this massive amount of data flowing around. In another architecture, when you have the game, your console has the game, it has the worlds created, and you have a tiny amount of data that relates to your movement going back and forth. So we actually have the ability at this stage to architect different scenarios that one scenario is a very high bandwidth scenario, the other is a very low bandwidth scenario. And we don't know which one ultimately is going to win.
All I know is that if you have an Oculus type game, VR game, you have to have a very good computer to use it, which means there's lots of data going back and forth. The one thing we didn't get to, we treat AR and VR as totally different. But there's one thing with the Microsoft HoloLens, which I not choked up the $2,000 it cost to get a developer's kit for one to try it myself. But that really sort of picks up some of the both AR in the sense that you can see and be seen through the glass, but with its holographic abilities, it gives you sort of that VR experience too, apparently. And there may be a whole language and technology has to be developed to do that. I think it might be called mixed reality that we haven't even talked about today.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction here just because I love to make predictions. 10 years from now, how many of you will remember this and come back? But one of Carrie will. We're going to have the same thing going on with most virtual reality that went on with interactive television in the 1980s and 1990s. That is, billions were invested, and the most we got out of it was an interactive Jeopardy, where, oh, wait a minute, we can already guess the answers on Jeopardy. But what we ended up getting was a new technology, a new medium that came out called the internet, that is giving us everything promised in interactive television without actually being through television. I'm going to predict that the limitation, as you said, you have this limitation on the screen. When we get holographic projection, that is true ability without wearing anything to have an image projected in space, that's going to be revolutionary both for AR and for VR, because that gets rid of the limitation you have of having to wear something. Think of Princess Leia. Shout out to Carrie Fisher and the great memories she gave us all. That image, help me, Obi-Wan. You're my only hope. Having an image floating in air. We're not there yet, but we're close.
I have to know me is to know I have problems with obsessive and compulsiveness. So if my kids wanted Xbox along the way, I'd always buy every single game, and I'd buy all the devices, fishing poles, guns, the drum set, all the guitars that go with that stuff, 3D television sets, okay, curved screen stuff. There's always, when I look at it, two problems. One is the frustration and the cost of wearing the devices and using them, and the fact that they break. But the other thing that when I spend my time now roaming aimlessly at the Best Buy looking for what the next obsession will be, is the fact that I always come back to before the purchase happens, that the device is available, but there's a huge lag and an amazing lack of content out there. Getting the content to the device and getting enough of it to keep it something that's mainstream rather than just hipsters, and people who are first adopters use it. So how do you overcome that lag, or do you see that being overcome? Because I hear, billions of new devices are going to be connected when we get to 5G and 6G and beyond. But how do you overcome the content lag to make it mainstream? And maybe, am I wrong about that? I base it on my three millennials,
I don't know. There are all sorts of success stories where the content has followed. I mean, we've gone through generation after generation of games where, there has been content, and every Christmas, I see all the titles that are sold out. So I think a lot of it is a lot of things just don't work or fail. But some technologies are successful, and you have the content and the hardware to go together and grow together.
I'm going to give you a different answer. In Chapter 4 of the Communication Technology book, we discuss something we call pre-diffusion theory, which are what are all the factors that have to be in place in order for a media technology to diffuse so we can apply the Fisher-Price curve and the others. And those relate to the provision of the hardware and the content. And with both the hardware and the content, you have to have production and distribution. And the rule is that if the company that is producing the content the company that produces the hardware subsidizes the content, you'll get more content. If they don't do subsidy and if they're not connected, chances are the extra things won't happen and it'll fail. So there's a whole set of things that, just as there are factors that predict how the S-shaped curve and how steep it will be, there are factors that predict before the first consumer adoption takes place what has to be in place, and the key is distribution.
We need to wrap up. Let me end with, I think VR is one of these where there's drivers, we don't know how strong they are yet. There are constraints, we know how strong, that they're strong. There's a balance that's kind of hard to tell. I'm not sure I'm nearly as pessimistic as Augie is about what this will be like in 10 years or 20 years, we'll see. But what would be the biggest question that needs to be addressed before we take the next step in a forecast? Do you think in terms of VR, not AR, VR?
Biggest question that has to be addressed is whether we're working with systems that are going to have distributed intelligence or centralized. If it's centralized, we have very high bandwidth needs. If we distribute the operation and we have with the gaming consoles, the power there, you need much less networking.
In terms of the success or failure of it, though,
it's consumer adoption. It's whether we get whether people are interested enough in the experience to move the time away that they're now spending on watching TV, listening to music, etc. Keep in mind, TV is still where we spend most of our leisure time, and the biggest reason for that is most of it's free. You look at the fact that Judge Judy is the most popular program in syndication.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention and your questions. We're going to take a 10-minute break.